So how does Izzy beat Sean Strickland in a rematch? That's what we're going to talk about today, because I have done, number one, the video where I watched the UFC main event at 293 and I gave you my in-person reactions in the moment. And then number two, I did a video on Strickland's Philly shell, but I have yet to say how does Izzy win in the rematch. We're going to cover all that today. The very first question around this topic, around this issue, is does Adesanya deserve an immediate rematch? Because let's look at what happened. He was the title holder for quite a long period of time. Then he got defeated by Pereira, got that immediate rematch, won it back, and now he's gone on and lost it again. When somebody loses, wins it back, loses again, do they get an immediate rematch, or should somebody else jump in line and get a chance at that title before him? Does he have to prove himself before jumping back up? Because we have to remember, I believe Sean Strickland was ranked number 5, and there are a whole slew of other people above him now, which might be going, pick me, it's my turn for my title shot. But Adesanya has being champion for a long period of time. He has not cleared out the division, but he's come very close to clearing out the division. And in my mind, I would say an immediate rematch is something which is warranted. The question in my mind that really comes up though is, does Izzy want to take it right away? In that last fight, it just didn't look like he had anything that was happening, anything that you could really build off, at least that night, where you could go, these are massive adjustments you can make right now in the moment to win the next round. It just wasn't there. So we have to look and go, okay, in a future fight, adjustments can be made, but if we jump on it too soon, is it going to be worth it? Should we take a pause? And remember, he fought Pereira very quickly after losing to him, but he'd already faced Pereira 3 times, and he was beating him in those fights. It was just a matter of, oh, I made a mistake and I got hit by Pereira's incredible power. But in Sean Strickland, that was not the case. He just did not have an answer for everything that was going wrong. And yes, I know many people say it's a cop-out to say it was a bad night, but I truly do believe that Adesanya had an off night. Does that mean he would have got the win if he had an on night? No. I don't know that, but I could tell in round 1, as soon as he came out, I'm like, well, something's off. Could be Strickland's odd style, but it could also be he was performing 10%, 20%, 30% below his normal standard. And you might be going, well, how does that happen? How does he correct it? Well, let me tell you from experience in fighting for these belts. Yes, I've won lots of belts, but I've also lost 6 or 7 fights. And sometimes it was not that my opponent was necessarily massively better than me. It was just something was off. Something that night didn't click. You get in there, you start warming up, you're like, uh-oh, this doesn't feel good. And it could be sleep. It could be other things in your life. You can't always pinpoint it, and I bet Israel Adesanya is unable to pinpoint exactly why he did not perform at his highest level, but who knows, that could happen again the next time. It could be even worse. So really he needs a better game plan. And another thing that I want to just touch on, which a lot of people argued, was, oh, okay, Izzy took on too much pre-fight responsibility. Like he was doing this, promoting his movie, probably going to radio stations. That's all part of being the champion. Hopefully the next time around though, he goes, okay, you know what? I'm gonna dial in 100% on my training, and I'm going to do the least amount of extracurricular stuff to promote this fight, because my attention needs to be on training and then I need the rest. So that's enough of that. Let's move in to what went wrong and what changes maybe he could make to get a win in a future fight against Strickland. Now, I could list out a whole thing of like, this is what fighters should do against Strickland, but the reality is we have to look at what Adesanya can actually do, not what other fighters should do, what Adesanya is capable of doing, because he's not just a UFC fighter who's been around for 4 years or something like that. He's a kickboxer with almost decades of experience, and getting him to switch his style and become, let's say, a big combo attacker, somebody who's going to come forward with 5, 6 punches against Strickland, that's probably not going to happen. So let's try and work within the realm of what Adesanya will be capable and comfortable in doing. Number 1, he had massive success against Paulo Costa with that low kick to the calf. He chewed that leg up. He was unable to do this against Strickland, but guess what? he was not setting it up. He was not using any distraction techniques. He would just throw a single low and we would see Strickland just fade away. Fade away. He was so good at that in the fight, whether it be upper body or lower body. What he can do is just start throwing something beforehand. He could come in and stick a sharp little jab. Strickland might back away. He might take that step. But then the next time you do it, you know your opponent's going to do the same thing. They're going to create that space, but then hopefully they're heavy on their legs, and as they back up, you can then attack that calf. Putting a punch before your low kick is something which should be worked on time and time again so you stop throwing singles. Yes, he had success with this in the past, but now he needs to make those adjustments and make sure there's a fake or a punch before that low kick so it lands, because he missed far too many low kicks. The next thing he needs to do is just a strategy change. This always bugs me with Adesanya. He will back up to the cage and he'll just sit here and he'll let his opponent come towards him. And what very often he's looking to do is wait for this guy to overcommit and counter. But Strickland was not overcommitting. He was not throwing 5, 6, 7 punches. So Adesanya would get here, he'd block a couple, and then he would accomplish nothing except going down on the scorecards. He needs to stop doing that. In a future fight with Sean Strickland, he needs to maybe move around, but not settle. Definitely not settle, because it did not work for him one point in the fight, as far as I can remember. So I would say strategy change. Stop putting the back to the cage and letting your opponent get off a couple shots and then just angling off, because you didn't do anything positive in those moments. Next up, he needs to train to defend that front kick. And this is probably something which he wasn't really on his radar. He didn't think about it, but that was getting on the belly far too many times, and it might not look like it was a big powerful shot. It really wasn't. But guess what? Every time it hits, it scores, and just it could just slow you down bit by bit. So he just needs to have it dialed in so that when he's doing his pad work, when he's hitting, you know, he's always calm, but you got to have that scoop. You got to have that scoop happening so that when you just do the little hollow out and boom, there, then you can come back with your low kick. If I was his coach, I would be telling him, we're going to drill this over and over and over. We're going to repeat it 1,000 times per week so that when we actually get to the fight, you don't have to think about it. And when that little snappy front kick comes in, you can just scoop and go about your countering. Now, I think something that I would like to see Adesanya do, because we already talked about him not being somebody who's going to step in and throw 1, 2, which he normally does, but then 3, 4, 5 to try and get Strickland, who's going to be tipping backwards, creating that space, but leaving his head exposed with that Philly shell. Adesanya is not going to do that. What Adesanya can do, however, and I think he'd be more comfortable with, is to fake a couple shots, step in, throw his 1, 2, quickly back away, and then step right back in. And what you're going to see here is some strategy from somebody like Pacquiao. Pacquiao's an entirely different fighter than Adesanya, but that motion where you step in, you step out, you step back in, you step out, you step in, I think this would work within Izzy's comfort zone, because he's creating the distance which he needs, so he could be out here, fake, hit, out, boom, 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 out, in, out, with attacks in between, creating that safe distance, couple fakes, and a little bit more offensive, but staying comfortable and not getting into that point where you're just throwing recklessly. Now, we also saw Strickland doing a very good job of dealing with Izzy's Brazilian kick, question mark kick, whatever you want to call it, just from here, reaching out and blocking. But if you start lowering your kicks down to the body and the person starts reaching, they're really going to expose their head. But he stayed high most of the time. I would like to see him start slamming in some body round kicks and getting Strickland to lower his hands more to create that opening. But even if nothing else happens and he just starts reaching here, then I would like to see Izzy coming off a kick to a punch, because that is an opening which I see being able to exploit on Strickland. The kick to punch fake, you slam in a couple body kicks, you get him reaching out, and then you come down the middle. You touch not with massive power. You don't let your shoulders turn as you normally would. You keep them fairly square, boom, and now from here you rotate your shoulder forward. There are some kickboxers in the world who are so good at this, and it's something which works very well. Now, this is not a whole comprehensive game plan, exactly how to beat Sean Strickland and exactly what Adesanya can do. This is me taking about 10 minutes and just going, yeah, this is what I would start with. So I could get so much more in depth, but I think these are starting solutions on how Adesanya could get a win if they go to a rematch, if Adesanya wants it immediately, if Sean Strickland gives it to him, if the UFC's into it. There's so many factors which will play out, but I thought this would be an interesting episode because we've had lots of interest around this fight. People on the channel are loving this type of content right now, and this is always an interesting conversation to show somebody how, when there's a fighter who lost, how they might be able to change things and get a win in a future fight by making adjustments. Could Adesanya have done this in the fight at UFC 293? Probably not, because most likely none of this was trained. You have to train things to make adjustments in the fight. You can't just go, oh, okay, this is the game plan, this is my little box on what we're gonna train, and now all of a sudden you're gonna ask them for this. Very rare will that will work. So maybe Adesanya has to open up his box on what they're gonna allow in training camp, and then he'll be able to include other things like I talked about today. But overall, I am still gonna stick with the fact that even though Adesanya might have had an off night, even though he could have done better, it was still an amazing performance by Sean Strickland, and nothing but congratulations to him. He's not one of my favorite fighters. I know people are like, oh, Gabriel, or at least some people have, why are you jumping on the Sean Strickland bandwagon? If people didn't like him before, they shouldn't talk about him now. I'd only seen this dude fight Pereira before, and I saw the holes in his defense, and I went, yeah, there's a lot of holes there, and he got knocked out. I thought against Adesanya it would happen. He did an amazing job, and he deserves lots of people to give him some extra notoriety now that he's done this amazing feat. If you want, you can throw down in the comments 3 things, your 3 main things that you think Adesanya would have to train to defeat Strickland. I'd be very interested to see what other people have to say, what your strategy would be for him to get a win over this new UFC middleweight champion. Let's call it there, guys. As always, train hard. I will see you back here soon for another video.